back. We are going to draw Elle, otherwise known as Millie Bobby Brown from the hit TV show Stranger Things. And this is her from, what, season 2, you think? That's season 1? No, yeah, I don't, she was like she was bald in season 1, wasn't she? Okay, so let's start with an egg. That is not the shape of her head. That is a placeholder that tells me where I'm going to put her head in my drawing. And we are going to take a first measurement is where are her eyes in relation to her head. Now her hair is very short, so there's the top of her head and there's her chin. So we are going to measure. If I was drawing her from life, I would measure like this because it would not be polite for me to put my pencil right on her face. And I would say that her eyes are exactly centered in her head. You can measure the same way you see me doing this, but right on the screen if you want. So that means her eyes go across the middle like that. And if you're not sure they're in the middle, you can measure the same way you'd measure off the screen. Use the pencil like that. Okay. Now, because this is a front view, we are going to do a line of symmetry down the middle this way to help us keep things balanced on either side. And the next thing we're going to do is measure the eye spacing. So if we go right through the pupils to the outside of the cheekbone, and then we measure the space between the eyes to the outside corner of the eye. So now we've got 5 units, and we want to ask ourselves, are they all the same or are they different? Yes, the middle one is definitely wider. It's about maybe 1 1/4. What about these two? Are 1 and 2 about the same? They're close to the same. I would say that her eyes are a little bit wider than her cheekbones. You see that? Like this unit is a little bigger than that. This unit is a little bigger than that. The unit in the middle is the biggest. So let's put, like, imagine one sort of biggish eye in the center. And then we're going to make a mark here that's slightly to the right of center and a mark here that's slightly to the left of center. So we've got, our eyes are the same size. Our space in the middle is about 1 1/4, and the space to the left and the right is about 7/8 of an eye. And that is our eye spacing. Really important to get that right. If you put too much or too little space in someone's eyes, it's not going to look like them. Let's go ahead and draw the shapes of the eyes. We're going to think of them very simply like this. You see how she's got very classic features, so they conform very closely to what we've learned. You see how the bottom of the eye goes straight across, the inside corners are lower than the outside corners, and we're going to block them in the same way in our drawings. Very, very lightly. But that is exactly what I taught you, right? Inside corners drop down, bottom lids are relatively flat, upper lids have much more of an arch shape. And I'm going to block in the shapes of the whites of the eyes. And I'm going to do a little first shading on the irises just to nail down those positions. Now, if we go from the centers of her pupils to the tip of her nose, we end up with something that's pretty close to an equilateral triangle. I'm going to measure on my screen. You can do the same thing. Okay, it's a little longer than equilateral. No, it's very, very close to equilateral. Okay, so everyone knows how to draw an equilateral triangle. That's going to be a good way for us to adjust to find the length of her nose. Again, do this very, very lightly. And we've also learned to look for the nose to be as wide as the space between the eyes. And I would say that her nose is exactly that wide. You see that? So we're going to drop down. And the nose has to fit inside this box. I'm going to draw the entire box. Okay. If we look for the brow line, which is right here, what I taught you is that from the brow to the bottom of the nose should be equal to the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. And I'm going to say it is. So that means this distance here to here should be the same as this distance from here to here. So I just need to give her just a little more chin. So now we've established that. And the last proportion that we learned about features is the mouth is normally 1/3 of the way between the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin. And if we check that, we can see that hers is maybe a little more than 1/3 of the way down. What do you think? Is anyone measuring that? It's very close to 1/3, maybe just a hair more than 1/3. Yeah, right, just a hair more than 1/3. Okay, so there's where that line's going to be. Okay. Let's do a little more of the geometry before we start with features. So from the cheekbones, we slant in slightly, just a couple degrees. You see that? Until we get down past the corner of the mouth. See, there's the corner of the mouth. And she has a kind of a very soft curve at the angle of her jaw. But we still need to identify where the jaw turns, and it has to be below the mouth line. So we can sort of block this in as well. And her neck is quite a bit skinnier than the angle of her jaw, probably because of her youth. She's not a fully mature face in this photograph. And her hair is hard to see here, but it's a little wider. It sort of follows this same angle, but a little further out. She's got very wide temples, gives her a very intelligent look. And then from here, we're going to come up and over for this kind of dome-like shape at the top of her head. And I'm going to go ahead and indicate the hairline. So here's the top of her head. The hairline is about 2/5 of the way down from the top of the head to the brow line. So that's right about here. Sort of like that. And we're going to block in the ears level with the tops of the eyes and the bottom of the nose. And the last thing I'm going to add is just define where the bottom lip ends and just a little hint of where the upper lip is going to sit. You know what? I'm also just going to define this plane change at the bottom of the nose. Very simply. My goal here is I want to trick my brain into believing that I'm seeing a three-dimensional form. So I'm even going to put this little triangular shadow here under the chin. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to add a little bit of shapes of shadow at the insides of the eye sockets. Once my brain starts to see this as a head, I'm going to do a much better job drawing the features than I would if my brain was just seeing a bunch of lines. So that's okay, the last thing I'm going to block in is the trapezius muscles. To locate those, I like to extend them and see where they connect. So they connect right under the bottom lip. So they're going to be like here and here. Now, is this supposed to look like her yet? Not really. But if there were any huge proportional differences, I think they would jump out at me. But they aren't, so I'm feeling okay about it. Okay, now we are gonna, the blocking is done. We're gonna let ourselves get into the actual features in a little more detail now. So if I zoom all the way in on this eye, I want you to notice by far the lightest part is not the white of the eye, it's this lower lid, that little shelf. That's what most people have a hard time, beginners have a hard time showing that. So let's start with we blocked this in. This is the upper lash line. We're going to go a little harder on this curve. All the way down to that little gland in the corner. And then we're going to go very lightly across the top. And we're going to double that line because we need to show that little shelf. So this is a double line. We're going to study the shark tooth shapes around the irises. Notice this one is almost equilateral on this side, and this one is much more tapered. And we're going to draw this crease where the upper lid folds under. And then in order to make this part stand out, we've got to shade not only the iris, but also the whites of the eyes. And we have to shade under this little pocket of skin. So that the lightest part of our eye drawing is right here. Above the crease here, there's some shadow. And this shadow merges with the form of the eyebrow right above it. And most beginners want to articulate forms whether or not they can see them in the reference. That's a bad habit. See how this is all pretty vague in the photograph, so we can make it all very vague in our drawings as well. And then how far we decide to bring this shadow in towards the bridge of the nose is going to define the bridge of the nose in our drawing. So that's important. So I'm going to hold off on my darkest darks here because I like to put those in last. And I'm going to leave things a little bit unfinished and just go across to the other eye, which is even more vague. Those shadow forms all kind of blend together even more. But here's that arching form of the upper lash line. Here's the arching form of the crease. The big pocket of shadow above it. Okay, so notice this all kind of just blurs together. Here's the little gland on this side. Here's the shark tooth. And here again is that illuminated lower lid. So we want to shade the whites of the eyes down and shade the dark under the eye a little bit. Like that. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to finish my darkest darks here. I'm just sort of getting things going. I do need to bring this dark out a little closer to the cheekbone. And we're ready to move on to the nose. So here's where, actually, let's define these plane changes a little better. This is almost shadow right here. It's not quite. This is a dark halftone. And here it is on the other side. I like to define these pretty clearly because it helps me make sure I'm right with the length of the nose. So put both of these in. And this is something I always like to measure in my work. And if you measure it, you're going to avoid half the problems that beginners have in drawing faces, which is usually making the nose too long. So I want you to visually relate this form, this plane change here, to this plane change here. So there's this plane change, and there's that plane change. You want to start to think of them as a pair that have to be placed correctly in relation to each other. And you'll notice that this little patch of skin between them is much smaller than most people realize. Okay, now we're curving from there around under into the bottom of our box like that. And here's the very tip of her nose, which is a small, almost straight line. And here are the nostrils, which are very open in this photograph. She has a slightly upturned nose. So these are not the little foreshortened teardrops that we normally draw. They are more ovoid. And now I'm going to refine this shadow edge. This comes up. And because the nose is upturned, this form shadow edge is very high. But then when we come around over the ala, it gets much lower. You see that? This goes high and then low. And the shapes of those shadows define the form just as much as your other outlines. So you want to be just as careful when you draw those as when you draw all your other outlines. Again, I'm not doing my darkest darks yet. I'm going to hold off. I want to make sure this looks like her before I commit to any really dark lines. So we're going to go down now to the mouth. Notice that the central portion of the curve here is the widest, and that these outside arms are relatively short, but she does have a very clear Cupid's bow form. You see that? With a little darkening at the outside corners. And I'm going to very lightly indicate where the upper lip ends. Not a hard outline, just a slight indication. And where the bottom lip ends. Again, very lightly indicated. And I'm going to shadow map. This is a form shadow on the upper lip where it turns into dark, and then there's a cast shadow on the bottom lip of the upper lip. So I made her look a little too happy. I'm going to just bring down. Yeah, she's, see, this is really important for expression, like just how deep these little pockets of shadow are in the corners of the mouth. And we're just going to block in. I'm going to be a little more specific on the shape of this shadow. And then it happens every single time, but I just ran out of room for the chin. I'm going to just drop that a little bit so I can fit this shadow. And this seems like a good time to pause again just for a minute. So now I'm going to back away from my work a little. And you can see that my nose is reading just a little bit too wide. So I'm just going to take away like a pencil width here and a pencil width here. And I'm going to define the curves of her cheekbones a little more. Remember, we blocked that in, but her cheekbones have a very classic curve to them. Okay, so we've got our cheekbones, and then notice this is something that artists often exaggerate a little bit. You see how here's the curve of the cheekbone and the jawline is coming from under it? So let's try to get that effect. See, we've got our cheekbone, our jawline is coming from right under it, and then it's gently curving around towards our chin. We do the same thing on the other side. And let's get a little more definite on these ears now. Her ears are fairly prominent. Here's the lobe. And we're going to be a little more definite on the outside shape of the ears. Don't worry if they're not perfect. Just try to follow along with me if you can. And this is the outside of the helix that we're looking at here. And this is the magic right here, this is very thick, and then it curves around and becomes very thin. It has a shadow inside it. So what we're seeing is this form actually flips around. We're seeing it's like a bicycle tire, right? This is the outside, flips around. Now we're seeing the inside. Same thing over here. We're seeing the outside of the helix. It flips around, and then we're seeing the inside. The tragus barely shows over here, and it doesn't even show on this side at all. And the only other form that we need to worry about is really the antihelix, which is bulging along here, and it connects down to that little depression beyond the tragus. So these forms look so complicated until you become familiar with them. Once you know the names for all the parts, they get a lot easier to draw. So before we get into our halftones, we're going to clean up some of our construction lines. We don't want to ever shade right on top of our construction lines. Yeah, she can levitate you if she wants. She can make heads explode, right? Well, she was like 10 in this what is this, season 3? Is it? Now she's like fully grown up. She looks like she's 30. She has a child? How old is she actually now? And she adopted a child? Okay. I guess before we do our halftones, let's get a little more definite on our dark darks. So our main darks are the irises and the pupils. The irises are almost as dark as the pupils. You can barely see that pupil back there, but putting it in is going to bring her to life a little bit. You see how much that adds, just that, and there's just a little hint of a reflection in the upper left corner. And the iris is very dark around the pupil. And on the other side, to be honest, I can't even really see the pupil on the other side, but so that made her look a little more alive. The lashes are casting a pretty dark shadow along the upper part of the white of the eye, like that. And this shadow at the above the eyelid on both sides is pretty dark. There's a weird symmetry to the shading in this photograph, which is due to the photographer's decision to use two light sources. There's a light coming from the left and there's one coming from the right. And you can tell that if you look at the shadow on the neck. This little triangular shadow there is actually where the two cast shadows created by the two light sources overlap. So it's kind of an interesting choice by the photographer in this instance. Exactly, yeah, it's meant to be slightly uncanny. I just heard what the I just read it a few weeks ago. I had heard the term, but I never knew what it meant. The uncanny valley. Has anyone ever heard of that? You've heard it a million times. Do you know what it means?
It means like facial features that look similar to like realism, but are just off enough to make it feel like weird.
Yeah,
I like watching a lot of like horror related stuff, so
yeah.
I've watched stuff about designing monsters, and like Uncanny Valley is a good way to test how they could make a
Mm-hmm.
monster look.
Yeah, I guess like with androids, if they're hyper realistic, then we accept it. It doesn't creep us out. And if they look really fake, we accept it. But the uncanny valley is like in between where they look.
I also heard it a lot with like art and whatnot. You want to avoid the Uncanny Valley.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going. Our goal with the nose is to let's go darker on the nostrils. The two darkest areas of most faces are the nostrils and the pupils. So that's where we want to press really hard. And then our goal here is to get a sense of the reflected light under the tip of the nose. So to do that, we're going to go, it's just like shading a sphere. We're going a little bit dark along the top margin of our form shadow. And then we're going to go a little bit darker on the cast shadow under the nose. And that combination of darks is going to cause this bottom edge of the nose to feel slightly illuminated by reflected light. I'm exaggerating that effect slightly in my drawing. You don't have to exaggerate it. I just want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing here. And we should be seeing a little reflected light on the upper lip, but to be honest, I'm gonna have to make it up because I can't really see it in this photograph. So here's the darkest line between the lips. And above that line is a form shadow. And I'm just going to cheat in a little core along the top edge of it to give a little sense of reflected light there. And along the bottom of it is the cast shadow, which is darker. And you'll notice that the cast shadow isn't totally even. It sort of bifurcates off into these little creases, which show the texture of the lower lip. So we don't want to go too hard on those, but we do want to show there's a little bit of movement across this shadow edge because the light's not falling onto a completely flat surface. It's falling onto a textured surface. And here this shadow follows the Cupid's bow up and over and becomes a little wider at the very corners of the mouth. And that looks kind of awful for some reason. There's a little darkening in the center of the upper lip and Okay, now let's study this shadow shape. This is the shadow shape under the bottom lip. And it is pretty dark. And then this is just like up here at the nose. We're going to do a core shadow along the top of this shadow and a darker cast shadow underneath it, because we need to show that reflected light along the bottom of the chin. Notice that the jawline here is light against dark. See, this is light, this is dark. Over here, it's dark against light. There's a halftone on the jaw, and the neck is lighter. And in between, if we're being honest, the jawline completely disappears right here. So let it disappear in your drawing too. Don't try to define things in your drawing that you can't see in real life. You see how I just let that disappear there? And I'm going to do the same thing over here. This is light against dark, dark against light, and in between, there's really no definition at all along that edge. Okay, so those are all our darkest darks. What's missing from our drawings now is the highlights. And the way to achieve a sense of the highlights is by shading the halftones. We already did a couple. We did a little bit under the eye, but this is where you want to hold your pencil like it was made out of ricotta cheese. Like you want to use such a light pressure on your pencil that you're barely touching it, because when you're drawing these halftones, you don't want them to compete with your shadows. See, this is a halftone here, this is a shadow here. This is about 3 times darker than this. Right? So here's halftone, and the halftones here are going to define these folds at the outside of the mouth. These halftones get a little larger at the corners of the mouth. And we're just going to keep doing halftones until we can read where our highlights go. So here's this whole zone is in halftone. This whole side of the face, not shadow, but all the way down. The only areas of direct light down here are these upturned planes at the sides of the mouth and at the top of the chin. We have the same thing going on this side. This is all halftone. And it connects to this shadow. And we've got halftone at the outside of the cheekbone here. A little bit of a darker halftone right here where the cheek overlaps the jaw. Same on this side. This whole entire plane, this whole side plane of the head is in halftone. As is this one. Again, the lighting here is weirdly symmetrical because of the photographer's choices. And finally, probably most importantly, I'm going to shadow map this. I'm going to shadow map the light, this sort of light bulb shape on the tip of the nose. And I'm gonna shade halftone all around it. There's a little halftone connecting the brow ridges. And there's a halftone along the side of the nose here and the side of the nose here. And you see what happens is the more halftones we throw in, the more the highlights stand out. The highlights are just the areas that we haven't touched yet. Now that we've done our halftones, some of our shadows are reading a little too light, so I'm going to go over these eye areas a little darker. And let's look for where's the light on her forehead. We've got these band of halftone above the brow ridge. Her eyebrows are really close to her eyes. That's what gives her a very serious look. And so our main lights are up here near the hairline, here on the brow ridge, here on the nose, and here on the cheeks. And I still need to put a little more halftone under the nose. But one surprising area where we often see a highlight that people sometimes overlook is the top of the muzzle form. You see how strong the light is here and here? Those lights are also important. For her hair, notice, as I'm telling you in your self-portraits, that remember that hair is shinier than skin, usually, unless you have really greasy skin or really flat hair. So we don't want to just color it with one value. We want to show more contrast in the hair than we did in the skin. So this gets really dark through here. And notice that this gets really quite light across the top. A lot of artists make the mistake of flattening that out, and then the hair just looks, instead of drawing the darks and the lights, they draw the average value, and then the hair is going to look gray, which is not what we want. I miss these little shadow shapes under the earlobes. There's a halftone along the side of the neck. And when I look at my drawing now, I feel like the one thing I'm missing is her upper lip. You know, I'm always warning you not to outline the upper lip, but her upper lip does have a little bit of a defined plane change. And see what I'm doing here? I'm going to hatch across this boundary just a little. I don't want it to look like lip liner, so I'm not using a hard outline, but there is a slight plane change along the top of her upper lip. And maybe a little more color to the lips, so I could get away with shading them a little bit darker. And a little bit of halftone on that bottom lip to make the highlights stand out there. Manipulating the shapes of these shadows at the outside corners of the mouth becomes really important for expression. And I'm going to back out one more time. What you can do in the classroom at home or at home is just to take a few steps back from your drawing. You're going to notice that any things that are really wrong about your drawing are going to really stand out at that distance. Another thing you can do, if you've been smudging your work, either accidentally or on purpose, another thing you can do at this point is just go back with your eraser and clean up some of your highlights. Some artists do smudge intentionally. That's not how I teach because I really want you to learn cross-hatching, but even if you're trying not to smudge, there's going to be a little bit of graphite on your paper, and you can go around with your eraser and clean that up at this point. I'm going to make one kind of significant correction on my drawing. I'm sure most of you didn't do this like I did, but you see how I was kind of careless about, see how small this shark tooth shape is right here? You see how in my drawing it's a little bigger? That's creating a slightly wall-eyed look in my drawing. Wall-eyed is the opposite of cross-eyed. Like, you see how her eyes really aren't focused correctly in my drawing? So what I'm going to do is just erase just the iris, and I'm going to just bump this over about 1/16 of an inch into there, and I'm going to bump that over about 1/16 of an inch. And that's really the miracle of portrait drawing, and the reason people think it's so hard is because corrections like this really shouldn't be significant enough to be noticeable, but our brains are so well attuned to following where people are looking that any little slight error in the iris placement is going to be immediately noticeable. In fact, now she looks even just a little bit too cross-eyed. I mean, I'm adjusting this like not even in a whole millimeter. And that feels a little better to me. Part of the problem is I was trying to invent some information in here, where this is really all just buried in shadow. So by just burying it in my drawing, I think it'll come out a little better. Yeah, that's gonna have to do. Okay, do we want to show any of our student work in the in today's video? What do you think? Okay, remember the drill. You're gonna put your name near the drawing if you want the world to know you did it, and you're gonna put your name far from the drawing if you don't. Okay, let's collect that work and have a look. Anybody who wants to share, bring it up to the front while I'm fussing with my drawing here. I think I did better than the first time. Thank you.
Don't judge me.
Thank you. Thanks. Just a second. Okay, let's quickly take a look at these. And I'm not going to do any commentary. While I'm doing this, you can get your phones out of the pockets. Very nice, Beth. These are all Introduction to Drawing students. Okay, let me get a little further back so we can see the whole thing, Zach. Okay. Very nice. Awesome. That's okay. And finally, Charlotte. And here's the one I did last period that I was not happy with at all. I think I did a little better this time. So thank you all for watching. Yeah, this is obviously the one I'm going to publish. And we'll see you next time.